Hello and welcome back to Yuricon 2023. I'm very excited to welcome back an old friend of mine, and I say that with, with all of the baggage that old friend carries. Mandisa Washington has a long history of mixing playful insight and scholarly enthusiasm in the realm of anime and manga scholarship. In 2011, she produced the documentary Who Are You Wearing? On alternate social identity and geek fandom for her MFA thesis. For 7 years, she ran Metro Anime NYC, coordinating monthly club. For 7 years, she ran Metro Anime NYC, coordinating monthly club meetups and academic lectures around New York. Mandisa has given talks on race and cosplay, otome dating games, and women in science fiction TV, among other topics. More recently, she shared her experiences as a professional mobile software developer for students and aspiring game developers. Her upcoming project, Caridian Nights, is a tactical role-playing game set in a fantasy version of the historical Silk Road. When she's not whittling down her manga backlog, you can usually find her knitting in a sunny spot or luring friends off the internet with food and games. Welcome so much. Thank you very much, Mandisa.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here to talk about this. So Mandisa today is going to be talking about one of my favorite topics. All of you who have followed me for years know this. It's about girls and guns on the run. So I'm going to take myself away and let Mandisa take the screen. So hang on one second and I will.
Hello. So basically from the lovely angels of Dirty Pair to the Nikita-esque likes of Noir and Lycoris Recoil, the Girls with Guns thematic genre, as I like to call it, has persisted in popularity well beyond its roots in 80s action movies and 60s spy fare. So the point of this talk is basically to look at what keeps us coming back to it as creators and as fans. Why does the genre have such resonance within the Yuri community? And ideally, where is the genre headed with changing social contexts? And so let's get into it. So of course, you got to begin at the beginning, right? You know, you started out, you could say it started in the 60s with things like the Avengers, you know, Emma Peel, that kind of thing. But as far as stories specifically centering on women and their relationships with guns, using guns, we really have to go back to Charlie's Angels. That was the thing. In the US, came out in the mid-70s at an Aaron Spelling production. He was very big with these sort of primetime soap operas. And an idea germinated among some of the writers and producers at his studio to come up with this idea of an all-female squad of police detectives who, at the time, you know, this is the 70s, so sexism was a bit of a problem, you know, then, not now, of course. And the idea was that this squad would go out and solve crime, but with a female flair, and it hit big. So Charlie's Angels ends up being sort of one of the pillars of the genre, but it's not the only one. There are all of these other variations and themes that essentially, as they came up, some of them really resonated with the community and built onto the existing genre and just built it up. So we have our Charlie's Angels likes, where you have usually 2 or more women in a squad. Sometimes they're police, sometimes they're vigilantes, and they solve crimes, help the helpless, that kind of thing. Then you've got La Femme Nikita out of France in the 90s. That was Luc Besson, also of The Professional and Fifth Element and a lot of other movies. And that started this trend of taking a girl or a woman off the streets and remolding her into a sort of assassin spy hybrid, usually for some shadowy semi-named government organization. Then you've got, to go back a ways, there's a certain amount of back and forth in time and across the Pacific. You've got in the Atlantic, you've got in Japan, you've got, of course, Dirty Pair. So that's really where you get the anime branch of the Girls with Guns genre really kicking off. They are, of course, the lovely angels, Kei and Yuri. And they, again, were sort of guns for hire within the context of a larger organization that could be contracted out by corporate or government entities. Notable, though, is that Kay and Yuri, their look and to a certain degree their attitude came out of professional wrestling. Apparently, as the theory goes, there was a conversation between the creator Haruka Takachiho, and I guess they were watching women's pro wrestling and they liked the look and they liked the idea of in space, and so the Dirty Pair were born. But we're not going to talk about it as much at this talk, but we can't really not talk about the Hong Kong action movie branch of Girls with Guns. Iron Angels, also known as Angel or Operation Angel, is the one I've highlighted here, just because that itself spawned a series of maybe arguably progressively worse sequels. But things like the Heroic Trio with the amazing, combo of Michelle Yeoh, Anita Mui, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Maggie Cheung. And it basically created an entire, subgenre just around that idea of either all-female squads or women in context of other kinds of action movie tropes. And we'll get into the anime side of it, but it's worth looking into a lot of those Hong Kong action movies. Also some other ones from Japan, even from Indonesia and from Thailand, that explore the genre. They have slightly different assumptions and so different takes on the themes. So getting into it, we've got the narrative and social context. I've got a lot of images here from some of my favorites. This one is Cat's Eye, classic. Three sisters trying to find art that was stolen from their father, chasing down Nazis and post-Nazis. So it's good time. It's a good time. So let's talk about over time and across series how these shows are essentially in conversation with the context that they find themselves. You can't write a story about women in a context that is traditionally portrayed as very male, this sort of hard-boiled detective type, without having something to say about the sort of social, political, and economic context that the show is created in. Looking just at what kinds of changes we've seen over the 40-odd years that this genre has really blossomed, you've got a shift in this idea of character agency. Like I said, with the Dirty Pair, they are agents. They've chosen this profession. With Charlie's Angels, they were cops and then they were recruited. But then you get into some of the more modern shows like, say, Noir or like Horse Recoil or, things like Kite, much younger girls. But there's this idea of loss of agency where you were essentially selected or otherwise pressured into doing this thing and taking on this role that maybe is not what you had in mind for your life. We've also seen a sort of shift in the age. A lot of the older shows in the 70s and 80s tended to focus more on grown women. Maybe they've been doing this for a long time. Maybe they've only just started. But over time, we've started to see younger and younger girls as the protagonists. In Noir, you see the Murray is a bit older. She's, I believe, in her early 20s. But Kirika is a child. And, obviously in a lot of these literal Girls with Gun shows, they are quite young. In Lycoris, there's a mention that the girls age out essentially or don't make it much past 18. So there's this sense that the stories have become less about adult women and their choices and more about girls perhaps with no choices, which gets us into this other point about exploring these ideas of determination and self-determination versus sort of fighting against your fate. This is something that the shows do tend to explore. There's a lot of back and forth. It's not really a linear progression over time, but it's definitely something that has evolved a bit in how some of the creators approach that concept. And we can take a look at that a little bit later when we look at a few more shows from the perspective of character themes. And then as far as the kinds of demographic that these stories are usually pitched to, originally it was very, very much a seinen genre. It's like I said, it's a thematic genre, so it's not necessarily tied specifically to any one. It doesn't have to be tied to any one demographic or market. But originally, you really only saw these in men's comics, and over time, we have definitely seen that open up. And to the point where we now even can claim to have a shoujo series in Sakabe Bu, the survival game club manga in Nakayoshi. And we're starting to see some josei titles as well. So it really is starting to open up, and marketers are starting to acknowledge that the audience for this is obviously quite a bit larger than it used to be perceived as. Moving on, we've got this idea of settings being used, again, like I said, in that conversation with the wider social context, where you have sci-fi, which is obviously, it's very traditionally been used as a mirror for the current scenario, the current society that we live in. But the kinds of stories that you can tell in sci-fi are different from those you tell in the real world versus historical fantasy. Now, you might say this is girls with guns. How far back can you go in history and have guns? You do have your stories of the Old West, and of course, everybody loves this good space cowboy. So the idea of, what is it like to be a woman or multiple women in that kind of a context? You explore those ideas of independence and determinism versus choosing your own fate. And then as far as sci-fi versus the current day real world, you've got to consider that Japan is a society where people may watch the big action movies and stuff, but people in their everyday lives generally don't have guns. Gun ownership is not really as big a thing as it is in America, due to laws, besides just culture, due to rather strict gun control laws. So while you do have people in Japan who are fans of guns, to the point where a lot of these stories, as much as there's fan service around the women, there's a lot of fan service around the guns. You'll get a lot of discussion of what manufacturer, what caliber, a series like Gunsmith Cats, where they really, show their research as far as how firearms actually work or don't work. That is maybe from a modern American audience or even a modern Western audience, it may ring a little bit different than it would in Japan. There it's seen as a little bit more of maybe an unusual interest, but it's not necessarily an interest that would bleed out into causing harm, or at least that's traditionally been the case. We'll see how that's changing, as we're in a much more global world, and we unfortunately see more unfortunate incidents involving guns. But also, you have this idea of using a choice of setting to show off the real world shifts in notions of femininity and what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a girl, coming of age stories, all of these stories that you usually would see in really any kind of context and could be told with any kind of story, but they're told not so much through firearms, but told through this idea of maybe a more militaristic context. And we'll dig into that some more as well. But really being able to explore what is, quote, allowed for women to do and what agency and what role do they seize for themselves. That's something that tends to get explored a lot with these kinds of stories. And of course, going along with that, the ideas of the changing role of women in society, and this notion of weapons being an extension of self, whether they are literally like your modern firearms or laser pistols or, lightsabers or magic or Gundams or whatever. There's this idea that we are exploring this character and exploring their journey to either express themselves or express their interests or, change the things around them in the world that they feel are unjust through this medium. And then we watch that, and that's the story. So speaking of Gundams, Witch from Gundam is another one of my favorites, new favorite. well, Gundam is an old favorite, but this particular series is a new favorite, and it has the distinction of it's not the first female-led Gundam series, but it is the first one where the the Gundam pilot protagonist, this first sort of traditional Gundam series where we've got a female protagonist. It's quite good, definitely recommended. But we're going to look here at some of the roots in folklore and archetypes that these stories key into. So obviously, like I mentioned, there's this idea of holding up a mirror to social assumptions and cultural stereotypes and really exploring what those mean and how those have changed. It's always important to note that culture is not a static thing, even within one location. These ideas of the warrior maiden or a war goddess, we find those across cultures around the world. We find those in stories of real world women who were queens or leaders, or maybe they were flagged as bandits, or maybe they were held up as incredible queens and leaders of their people. To history is written by the victors, right? So depends which side you're on. But this idea that at various times in history in various places, we revered women as warriors, as compared to modern ideas, which are shifting, to be sure, and do vary depending on where you are. But in media, in Western media particularly, you do still get this idea of female equaling the support or the subordinate role. Looking at sort of maybe more traditional anime depictions of women, you'll have that classic where you have the male swordsman and the female archer. It's not necessarily that she's not also a warrior, but there is that sense of being a partner, in some kind of a support role. Even in some series that have a lead female protagonist, one I like is Love of Kill. It's a good show, but it does get some flack and some criticism at the start, where you get a certain amount of maybe uneven, both partners, it's a male and female partner there. Both partners do save each other, but it got some flack at the beginning with this idea that the woman was getting saved maybe a smidge more than the man, until things kind of evened out later on. So, we're still kind of exploring these things, even in series, even in, say, josei series that are geared towards a female audience. Like I said, it's a conversation, and the conversation doesn't really end, right? That gets back into this idea, even when we take out the military context of it, this idea of activities or even hobbies that might be coded as hard or masculine versus soft or feminine characters. In something like, that Nakayoshi series, Survival Game Club, this idea of using airsoft rifles, like, similar to BB guns or paintball, that kind of thing. That's obvious. It's a hobby. It's a gender neutral hobby. There's nothing gendered about the hobby. But the one of the gags that's sort of inherent to the story is this idea that this is not an appropriate hobby for young girls. And then it's almost like a running meta joke that, who allowed this kind of a story to be in Nakayoshi, where you see stuff like Child's Toy or that kind of thing. And so we get this idea of this juxtaposition between the hard and the soft, which honestly, that tension is good for drama. And, aside from all the sort of meta context and the social commentary, in and of itself, it just creates some interesting and juicy stories. And again, talking about these themes of being in conversation, even within the story, the characters themselves, generally speaking, tend to be not necessarily in opposition, but having that tension with the society that they find themselves in. You see this a lot in Masamune Shirow's works, stuff like Ghost in the Shell, Dominion, that kind of thing, Appleseed, where you have a character who is essentially, even if they are ostensibly on the side of justice, just the side of justice may not be the side of society. And something like in the B-Train works like Noir and Madlax and El Cazador, there's again this sense of these are the good guys, right? These are the side that the audience is supposed to root for, unabashedly, without ambiguity. But they are, assassins or mercenaries or or bounty hunters. They're not necessarily working within the confines of the law or society to achieve their ends. And that's obviously a very common archetype in action movies and these sort of heroic, heroic stories. But that role, that pivotal center role, is not always female. And so it opens up some interesting concepts as far as what that means when that person in that role is female, for whatever definition of female works within that story. And then a couple of, to keep it a little bit more on the humorous side, a lot of times I have heard from people who are like, I don't know if I could get behind a series that has all these guns and everybody's shooting and it's all wild and it's all crazy. How can you like that? Nobody wants to be in a shootout. I'll just put that out there. No one in real life, no one wants to be in a shootout. In a lot of cases, this is intended, even in the more melodramatic series, it's intended as a little bit of escapist entertainment. You've always got to balance out, the sweet with the medicine. So even if it's a story that is trying to say something about these characters, about the world that they live in, about the world that we live in, there's still a sense of, even if some of the people don't make it all the way to the end, there's still a little bit of sense of take a breath, calm down. This is all in good fun. And a lot of times that emotional catharsis that you get from it is actually the point. So there's always that to keep in mind. And yes, you cannot deny the fetish angle. Again, a lot of these stories, especially the classic ones, they started in seinen magazines. There are a lot of well-endowed women in very skimpy clothes. I think maybe one of the more distinctive series that I saw early on was, I really got into Silent Mobius. And, from there I got into Kiyasamiya. I like his stories. He really likes drawing women. He really likes drawing women with maybe not so many clothes on. And that's just sort of tied up into the stories. I think that may be changing over time, but that may just be the stories I read, and maybe that's not universal. So we'll see. But again, all in good fun. So here we get into character themes. Again, Gunsmith Cats. It's a lot of fun, and they've re-released the manga, so that's awesome. So one of the key things that you'll see coming up as a sort of recurring context is this idea of military themes, military tropes, these very deeply personal stories, whether they're comedic or dramatic, but in the context of either military or paramilitary or law enforcement, something along those lines. Found family is a big one. It comes up a lot over and over, especially in stories where you've got that sort of Nikita-like approach, like I said, where they'll take people who are either orphans or young children and put them together. But there does seem to be more of an emphasis on you are fighting to protect or preserve something. Maybe it's to protect that found family. Maybe it's to preserve the new life that you've built. You get these ideas of self-discovery. A lot of the journeys and the arcs that the characters go on are about either discovering things about themselves or putting them in a different context than they had expected. Or, you've got this sort of odd couple partnership approach, exposing each other to new ideas that they hadn't really seen or thought of before, and thus learning more about themselves. You've got these ideas of taking back control, or finding your own personal voice. That comes up a lot. And there does seem to be, I would say in the better stories, there is this idea of not just that it's okay, but it's encouraged to be whatever kind of person you want to be. That sense, I didn't explicitly mention it here, but that sense of learning to accept who you are, even if you're somebody like Rally and Gunsmith Cats who really loves guns and fast cars, that's okay. That's just who she is, and that's the kind of person she wants to be. That's not just okay, but it should be encouraged. And that's, I think, a really powerful message that maybe gets lost in the, in the jiggle cam and and stuff blowing up, that kind of thing. Another point along those lines is a lot of times why the characters are trying to go on this journey, or why they need to go on that kind of emotional self-discovery, is a lot of times there tends to be some kind of trauma. Noir is full of that, this idea of childhood trauma that you are learning, not necessarily to even overcome, but to sort of unpack and work through. That tends to come up a lot in the more dramatic shows, certainly, but even in some of the ones that lean a little bit more comedic or a little more slapstick, you can have that underlying, like I said before, harmony and counterpoint. There's that underlying melody in there of trauma. And then, in the ones that have good soundtracks, they literally give the trauma an actual melody so you can hear it. But there's that sense that this is not just a catharsis for the audience, this is a catharsis for the characters, and we're going along that journey with them. So then, of course, you have the romance side. And unfortunately, I mean, we could talk about it after, but there are a lot of series that, they do that flirt up to the line kind of approach. They do a lot of partners as lovers, the girls in Dirty Pair, they live together. Like Chorus Recoil, they have all of their, hijinks and shenanigans, but they have a lot of that, I'm doing this for you, or I'm going to give up this, I'm going to sacrifice whatever so that she can be happy and whatever. You get a lot of that, which is awesome. But it does sometimes leave you wanting a little bit more out of the story. I guess the unfortunate side, if you're getting the catharsis through the more action side, then that can sometimes leave the romance side without any climax or payoff or resolution in a lot of cases. Depends on the series, though. Different creators handle these things different ways. Again, a lot of these sort of classic action movie setups, this idea of the veteran and the rookie, it tends to come up a lot. It maps really well onto existing patterns of Yuri relationships, where you have this concept of the veteran walking the rookie into their new life, and getting them to understand things about themselves that they may not have previously. I mean, there's a lot of allusions here where everything is either spoken but not spoken. Sometimes it is spoken, although that's a little bit more rare. Which for Mercury was doing that. They were trying to explore things a little bit more overtly. But just in general, some of the series really just do a straight action movie, and then this is the distaff counterpart of it. Some of them really do try to explore sort of the way that women may look at the world, or that the world looks back at women, and how that subverts some of those action or military tropes and concepts and patterns. So it can create these sort of interesting little ripples and, patterns of interaction between these ideas. You get these ideas of, the classic mentor, your grizzled mentor. What if that is a mother figure to you, or your literal mother, as it was in Gundam? What does that mean to both of those relationships, your mentor and your mother relationship? Or this idea, like in not the anime, but the Hong Kong movie, The Heroic Trio, this idea of, well, what if you are the wife, the nice little housewife, and you're doing everything and everything is fine, except you are the one who is the vigilante with a secret identity. And a lot of those assumptions about, the husband is a cop, and after hours he goes out and hunts the streets and whatever, like Batman or something. Okay, well, now what if he has to come home and make sure that the kids have their lunch and this and that? And you can have a whole conversation about what it means to be a wife, but certainly what it means to be a wife with a secret identity is a very interesting thing to explore. Again, not an anime, it's a US TV show, but Scarecrow and Mrs. King from the 80s was a great one for sort of exploring that and what that means for a wife and a single mom, essentially. And, a couple of last points that I just want to touch on, to just remind people, it's not just guns. Like I said, the weapons here tend to be an extension of the self. So you can have, paper and read or die, or I like to say love and paper. That's their secret power. They use that as a weapon. They use that as an extension, literally in some cases, of themselves and how they operate. Something like Silent Mobius, you've got a sort of a kitchen sink world of magic and espers and aliens and cyberpunk and dystopia and hackers and just everything all at once. Oh yes, and cops. Again, this is Sakage Boo, the survival game club, where they've got their cute girls doing cute things, also with airsoft, imagining themselves playing out, crazy action movies and stuff. So you get a lot of these things. And then this is Crossfire. It was a side story in the Hellsing manga. But, again, you have these ideas of playing around with some of the tropes, being creative with it, and exploring ideas that maybe don't get as much light as they might otherwise. And in a lot of cases, part of the point is to, you've got these ones where it's a pair up and you've got the ones where it's a team up of multiple people. But part of the whole point is that you are exploring two things. You're exploring these relationships, relationships between female characters, whether that's a more sister-like relationship or partner-like relationship or lover-like relationship or some combination crisscross thereof. But you're also looking at it through the lens of how can these people protect what's important to them. You give somebody something important, and then what do they do with it when things are, when the shit hits the fan, essentially. And so that's really the crux of the genre. The whole point of it is to take on this, it's not just a coat of paint on an existing genre. It really is taking well-known structures and a well-known framework and unpacking it, refolding it, looking at it through a different lens, and then doing that over and over and iterating on it to see what new angles you can explore. And then last shout out, I mentioned them before, but you can't really talk about this genre without talking about Masamune Shirow. He's kind of made this girls with guns concept a major part of his work. And of course, similarly, Koichi Mashimo with Studio B Train, he actually started, I think, either started back in Dominion or maybe Appleseed. He worked on that. He worked on a bunch of stuff, but then he went and did B Train, and among many other things, he had done that core trilogy of Noir, Madlax, and El Cazador de la Bruja. And that for a lot of people was sort of their entree to the genre. I would say this is a genre that has an ebb and flow over the decades. And then what'll happen is one really popular show will come up and people will jump onto that and say, oh my gosh, it just happened. But it's my hope with this that people will take some of the suggestions, do a little lookup, and maybe find some series that they had not already checked out. And so that's my talk.
Okay, I'm just going to pop myself back on here.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. There we go. Well, thank you. Yay, that was amazing. I got a lot of comments. I'm writing down furiously. So let's start with the conversation we started yesterday, and then I said we have to shut up and not say this right now. What was the first Girl with Guns thing that you enjoyed?
So I was trying to think about it. So I came up with like the 90s OAV era, right? So my first fan sub day, I grew up with like Voltron and that, But my first fan subbed anime was actually Cutie Honey in a sci-fi, like a local sci-fi convention after
Nice.
hours room that at age 14 I was definitely not supposed to be.
Right, as we all were. I mean, I actually am sorry that I didn't get to experience that because I didn't come to anime until my 30s. So I approve that you were doing that. It's absolutely appropriate.
But I was thinking about it. So I think probably the first thing that made an impact on me, and then that impact ended up lasting a very long time, was the 90s Dominion Tank Police OAV. I remember being like, oh shit, it's a tank. That's badass. And the Puma sisters. And I didn't even, nothing else about the plot really sunk into my head, but I was like, I want a tank, and those cat girls are awesome. And that,
you know what you want, right? That's the
that
thing
was it. I think I actually saw Dominion Tank Police before I saw Ghost in the Shell.
Okay.
And then for a period of time, for whatever reason, no matter where, that was at that point I was college. So it was like I ended up seeing Ghost in the Shell, I think about 4 times in different contexts.
Different contexts, right? You just keep ending up seeing it over and over and over.
It would just be somewhere and they would be like, oh, we're going to show some anime. Okay, cool. What did I show?
Ghost of the Shell again. Weird. Yes.
Yes.
So odd. So where do you think this genre is heading? Because you've been watching it for so long and you've seen it go through a lot of changes. And as you say, there's ups and downs. So where do you think it's going?
I think for a while there, I was worried that it was getting so young that we were going to have zygotes with guns.
You just slayed me. I call them fetuses with frilly dresses. I'm 100% with you on that.
So I'm actually glad. I was actually glad. I was glad with like Horus that they were like, okay, these are 16 to 18-ish year old girls. I'm like, okay, that I could accept that. But,
even if the art isn't really reflective of that, because that's the moe thing. Because fashion, you're talking about the whole femme fatale thing and women skimpy outfits. Fashion has so much to do with this. Like the youthening that we're seeing is partially because of the simplification of the moe style. Right. You can tell me a character is, I don't know, 35, but if she looks like a blob, no, she isn't. She's 6, and I don't care what you say, and there's fashion has a lot to do with it. And once upon a time, artists had the time and the money
to actually
adult women.
Yes.
They don't really anymore.
I think that one of the things I actually liked about that show, this is a plot, right? But one of the things I liked about the show was they went shopping, right? Yeah. And you could say, okay, well, that's like a cliche and a trope.
No,
women go shopping.
It's a thing blah, blah, blah. Girls do.
It's for real. It's a thing girls do for real. And it was, it was part of that idea of self-discovery. It's like, if you've always had to not, it's like, you're literally in a regimented organization.
You're training every day, all the time on a survival level.
Right. So something as there's no practical need for this, right? Like nobody needs frilly things to live, right? It's not food, it's not air.
Right. And so something so banal becomes an incredible moment of self-awakening.
Right.
I am a human, not a
with agency. I am not someone else's weapon. I am my own person. And then of course, when you're in that context, you get the opportunity to kind of push the character designs a little bit and be like, okay, well, we're gonna send them, are we gonna send them to little girls, little girl clothes? No, you're gonna send them to like Sephora or something.
Right.
And then,
exactly. Give them a sexy black dress and whatever. Yes, absolutely. And we see that scene as well. There's also the thing that's interesting to me is that line you were talking about, how they get really close sometimes in relationships without ever going over it. And we know that B Train made that as a conscious decision, right? They actually said out loud in words while I was standing there, that if you want to see it, you can see it, but if you don't want to, that's okay. And they did that in Nanoha, the original Nanoha series, on purpose, because you want to get the largest possible
audience. Right.
You got it.
It's a commercial decision. I do see that.
Totally understand. And Licorice Recoil was a little bit different because they were definitely heavily leaning on pairing the characters to the point where the audience, I actually got into an interesting argument on Twitter because I had said they're not a couple. Now, what I meant was they could become one.
But as of this moment.
But what we see They are
just
not
this bit.
yet one.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Takina is in love with, was it Chisato, right? But not saying it. There's no relationship. And
Not
to
yet.
me, as a grown-up, a relationship has to be two-way, right? It can't just be
Right.
like my fantasy does not make you a relationship. That just is a fantasy. And so even in the novel, we get the sense that they could certainly become a partnership on a romantic or sexual level, which we don't really get into because they are kind of still young. Plus, they
Right.
had a shortened childhood. Let's say. Let's be
nice about it. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And the same thing is true with Muriel and Kiriko, although that was even more vague, right? My dear Muriel, Itoshi Muriel, and that's like all we ever got in 26 episodes, right? And it's like, oh, people go, oh, but she's in love with it. I'm like, there are people that I love,
but I'm
not in love with. Like,
right.
I love all my friends. I love you. I think you're an amazing human being.
You are awesome too.
Thank you. And we can love each other without feeling romantic or sexual or
right.
intimacy. It could be and it goes a lot. But I've written about this a lot recently about female intimacy. Really confuses people who don't get it.
Yes.
And this is really these series. What they do is they present a form of female intimacy in an action setting, which, as you say, sort of subverts the whole concept of the action setting.
Right.
But
it gets to this issue. I mean, it's a broader issue. It's certainly not just an anime. There's this broader issue of how do you present and how do you read intimacy? I mean, we're seeing in, you want to talk about like the real world social context. We see all of these surveys where you have people who either misconstrue or misunderstand what healthy and non-healthy expressions of intimacy even look like,
right.
And to
if I just keep asking her, she'll eventually say yes, because that's what the movies tell me.
Right, but this is the thing. This is always one of those. This is always one of those things where it's like, people say, "Oh, well, you don't get you don't watch movies or you don't watch anime to know how to act." Yes.
Yeah, but if that's all they've ever encountered, that's
But it's not just that. It's not just that. I look at it from the perspective of books or anime or whatever. It's when you're dealing with actual live humans out in the world, you are not privy to their internal monologues, right? You only at best, and not even 100% of the time, know your own internal monologue. One of the things that media affords you is you can literally see a relationship from both sides, which is physically impossible in real life. And so, for all that we talk about like, oh, well, tech is influenced by sci-fi, right? It's like, well, we got flip phones because there were the Star Trek, tricorders and stuff, the communicators and whatnot. But the emotional development of people, especially when you're talking like adolescence, where you're still, you're not 100% sure what's going on in here.
You're not baked yet, so
you don't know what's going on. So there is a certain amount of using that as maybe not a, paint by numbers how to live.
It's a bellwether. It becomes a bellwether, right?
Right.
It models behavior, which is why I'm fascinated by the series that are currently all these I've been reading and watching a lot of slice of life. I have an article coming out shortly on ANN about this, where they really model female intimacy that is not sexual. It's not romantic. It's just a lot of good friends banding together to do good friend things. And this is a thing that's really lacking in a lot of, particularly Western mainstream media, where you do get like what I joke about, the one story, right? It's a female character, but she's really a man, right? She's in all her actions are the way men act. Like,
man in a dress. That's
right. They've taken away her family. First, we have to completely give her no society. She has no people to talk to, as if she doesn't go out and buy groceries and say hi to the cashier. I mean, at the very least, you say hello.
Now, Erica, you know that when you are saving the world from
you don't talk to anybody.
You don't eat, obviously.
And you don't have anybody else who's helping you except for the one dorky guy on your computer. Like that's it. He's the only person you'll ever speak to, right?
There was actually this is again like TV, movie, anime, right? But there was a Canadian sci-fi show, Continuum, it was awesome. I mean, the sci-fi aspect of it was really, it was mind blowing, and I have a pretty high threshold for blowing my mind, right? But one of the things I really liked about it was it had one of those sort of classic time traveler fish out of water stories, but they almost emphasized the fact of, well, okay, she's in this other world to her, right? She has to form connections.
Right, because
there's
and
no way
women
to
do.
survive.
That's how we
That's how we
actually
operate.
function.
Yes, yeah.
Right. The first thing we do is we develop organizations, and like you and I met with ShojoCon, and it was because of this very thing where a bunch of people were like, "Hey, lots of us like this one thing. Let's get together.
Let's do the thing
and talk about it in person." Right, and that's how that happened. And Yuricon sort of started from the same thing.
Same thing.
We want people to get together. We have communities online. They're no different than the communities we build offline. And women tend to need and want those kinds of communities in a way that I think it's still socially and emotionally acceptable.
Yes.
So it's always weird when you see the femme fatale, like, you know, somebody hopping on her motorcycle, she's going to get revenge, and she literally has zero assistance except for 15 million weapons that came out of nowhere.
But it doesn't, it often doesn't even, like we were talking before about, you know, isekai, and this sort of difference between women in isekai, you know, women protagonists in isekai versus male protagonists in isekai. And it's like one of the consistent themes with these sort of women in isekai stories, whether you're talking about your modern, like literal isekai, or even, you know, older fantasy stories, is they immediately start making some kind of a relationship with
absolutely people. Because they know that they're not going to get along.
Relationship. It could just be, hey, I need directions. You know, can you help me with that?
Right.
And that just is immediately a thing. It's not, I'm going to commit world domination tomorrow.
Right. I mean, and it's not like I'm going to pillage and rape my way through this world because I couldn't as a salaryman, which is a really weird thing to think, gentlemen, if you're watching. That is a very strange way to think. Right. I can't kill and rape enough people in this world so the other world will be appropriate. Get help. That's all I'm saying.
I will say, you know, I guess this is I'll try to keep it as spoiler free as possible, but with I'm the villainess and I'm taming the final boss.
Right.
You know, one of the interesting things I like about the actual real villain in that is that they lampshade the idea that someone who goes into the, you know, finds themselves in this context and immediately says, I am now going to do all of the sociopathic things that laws prevented me from doing, is a sociopath. They're like, no, just so we're all clear, this is not
that's actually how I felt about 12 Kingdoms, because, you know, of course, we're following one character and she goes and becomes the villain, right? And then suddenly she realizes she's still not the fucking hero of the story. And I felt bad for her, but also the choices at that point, because up to that moment, you're like, she had no idea. She's shoved into this position where she's again trying to do her best and make contacts. It turned out she's on the wrong side of the battle. When it turns out she's not the hero, at that point, she begins to make decisions that are just unacceptable. You know, where she goes, I'm not the hero, so I'm going to kill the hero, screw her. And you're like, okay, kid, back it off a little bit. Maybe you could have just said, hey, we're both stuck here. Let's see if we can work together. But you didn't. You chose violence.
But this is the thing. I think one of the interesting themes that keeps coming up, you know, I'll bring it back to the main topic. Like one of the interesting things that does specifically come up in these Girls with Guns shows is that idea of, can you know, there's using violence and there's choosing violence.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so and sort of exploring the nuance between those.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that action movies don't. I am an action movie aficionado.
But it's like,
but they often like mush them together.
Yeah, no, like, absolutely.
Oh, you know, John Wick's dog died and he's having a bad day, so now he's going to kill 100 guys.
Right.
And it's like, okay, but is he killing 100 guys because they really screwed him over? Or is he killing 100 guys because he's hurting inside?
Right.
The only way he knows how to
right. It's his only coping mechanism.
Exactly.
So you get all the
full disclosure, I still haven't seen the John Wick movies.
So in the old Hong Kong flicks, you got that a lot. right? So you mentioned Heroic Trio, which is an outstanding movie, but I also want to say Wing Chun, starring Michelle Yeoh, which is the first thing I ever saw her in. And it's a sort of vaguely real, it's sort of a biography. It's a biography, there's a word, I can't say it now. A sort of a biography for Wing Chun, who's an actual woman who, in theory,
started that
this martial art called Wing Chun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And her thing was hand-to-hand combat at a slightly mid-distance. Okay, that's important in martial. In Chinese martial arts, they make it very, very clear between
how far.
Yeah. So Wing Chun is sort of in the middle there, and that's the sort of thing. She had a shitty situation and it's revenge and blah blah blah, but she chooses not to hurt when she cannot hurt, and she chooses not to, So it's also this choice to be better than the bad guys all the time, and you see that a lot in Hong Kong flicks, in Kung Fu flicks back in the day, and it's interesting because you do get that in some cases in like the noir Mad Max and El Caso de la Bruja specifically. They typically choose to err on the side of violence as a tool only,
right?
Even though they're actually in a position where violence is the only tool they have.
But it's also that it's not even just that they're doing it, they're also doing, it's almost like, walk me through your thought process, right? Like
how do we get here?
Right. And
it's 26 episodes.
I think part of why that framework of having either a partnership or, or a team up, especially with women characters, because I mean, they fight crime. I was raised on they fight crime shows. He's an X, she's a Y. They fight crime, right?
Right, absolutely.
But part of the shtick in that setup, in that framing, is lack of communication, right? Like that's often part of the tension.
Right. It's
they don't
parcel of the romantic tension.
Right.
We constantly bicker all the time.
Right, but then they also don't communicate even about like objectively
the things that are important.
Exactly, right? Like you can choose not to tell somebody your feelings. You cannot choose not to tell them that the terrorists have planted a bomb. Like you can't, that's not a thing.
Right.
So I think part of the difference, part of the thing that tends to get explored, or part of what they use the framework to explore, is if you have, even in cases where we've got like the odd couple pairing and you've got that kind of shtick, the red oni, blue oni kind of thing, they still communicate about the mission, right? They still communicate about what is going on, that is pertinent to the thing. It's never like, oh, well, she pissed me off, so
I'm gonna go off and do whatever.
No, it's just no.
It's interesting if we go back to Noir, Mad Max, and El Cazador de la Bruja for a second. We actually don't get good communication, but we do. It's very interesting because it changes with each series, right? So Muriel and Kirika do not speak. Just simply, there are no hardly words, and whole episodes go by. There's no words spoken.
No, I always, in my head canon, they hear the soundtrack, and so that's actually the communication.
Same. So, oh my God, Contra Gomez started. We gotta go running. Like that's how it is. Right. Exactly. Selva Noss is going, pull out your gun, get going, you're gonna have to shoot. By the way, best soundtrack ever. So that's, and then Mad Max, the two main characters can't be in the same space at the same time because they are actually the same person. Spoiler alert. I know it's like 25 years old, get over it. But they actually can never speak to each other. So we have other characters who know both of them talking. And they don't say anything of importance because they're in two different parts of this alternate world, which is just fascinating because they're all in these alternate spaces that skew and miss each other.
So they're all out of phase with each other.
They're all out of phase with each other, and then it all blows up at the end and everybody lives happily ever after. And then there's El Cazador de la Bruja, where you have two women. It's a Western style. We're doing the whole freaking
cowboys.
It's cowboys, and it's the kung fu, David Carradine's kung fu, where they go from town to town to town, and they talk all the time, and we learn by osmosis because they don't often have those conversations till well into the story where they both are in a place where they're comfortable actually saying anything of importance, and that's the classic framework, right? And then at the end, there is romance, and that is it goes along with a swell of music, and a singer singing, this, my love, and so you're like, gee, I wonder if they like each other. I don't know.
But then you could argue that because people have said, well, what ties these three shows together? Because this is not a trilogy. What the heck is
no, it's not a trilogy.
But they're I see them as a trilogy, kind of like I can't remember the director's name. But you remember the French movies? It was like French or Czech movies, Red, White, Blue, and it was
No,
like
no, I don't know this.
I'll find a link, but they're really good movies. But the idea was that these were three pictures in the life of different people experiencing different losses, right?
Okay.
And so it was this exploration. You don't, again, spoiler alert for 30-year-old movies, at like somewhere in the middle of the last movie, you finally see kind of how these people are somewhat tangentially related to one another. But through the whole thing, you're like, these people have nothing to do with each other. This is not a trilogy. These
right.
are
but I think the Betrayed
they're
trilogy,
exploring the same kinds of themes.
That's exactly it. I was going to say, you have three unique takes on the same concept. There is a conspiracy. They're after these two women. These two women are highly skilled fighters, and they don't necessarily know why.
Right.
In both cases, all three cases, one of them knows why, and the other one has no idea.
Right.
But
even the one who knows why
brings something to it.
Yeah. They don't necessarily know all of the.
They don't know all the details of who they are and why they are, and it's relevant, but it's not relevant because they eventually all learn to function without it. It's like, I do know how I got here, but fuck that. It's stupid, like it's a bunch of stupid old men who doing whatever, and I don't need that in my life. But so I feel like it's a trilogy in the sense that we had a basic thread of not continuity but concept.
Thematic.
Said, what are three
trilogy.
different ways we could do this that are entirely unrelated, different place, different time, different people, different situation, and still explore the same concept?
Well, because you're exploring it from a different lens, right? Now, these are different characters, but if you go on the assumption, I mean, it's a little bit meta, but if you go on the assumption that the audience has continuity, then the story continuity is not the actual literal story. The story continuity is the sort of meta layer. So to your point, like in noir, they aren't communicating, and that's actually, that ends up being part of the challenge that they have to overcome.
Right.
In Mad Lax, they have a more literal challenge to communicating. And then by El Cazador, that's the sort of, the happy Goldilocks of now we can finally figure all this shit out.
Right.
And so you could conceivably say it's like, okay, well, if it's a ballsy move because not everybody is going to see them all
and have the same context in the conversation, right?
Exactly. Right.
But it's not dissimilar.
Artists do weird stuff like that.
It's not dissimilar from what we've done with Sailor Moon. I mean, all of us who've watched Sailor Moon multiple times in multiple formats and read the manga multiple times at multiple formats and have watched the musicals and, blah, 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 blah. We have built up the story. So if you say to me, why doesn't anyone see Usagi and the other Senshi transform? It's not really headcanon, but I have a logical explanation based on what I understand this to be. Also, because Takeuchi is basically a lazy writer and doesn't bother filling in details, is the truth. That's in the real world explanation for literally every question you have about Sailor Moon. But in the fandom, we have filled in all of these details, and we can tell you, well, it's a glamour. And we have seen it. There's a single scene in which we see the glamour occur. And so we know that it's true and real, but also that was only in the old anime and was never mentioned anywhere else. So the fandom created it, and then they just threw it in there. So that's what happens when I think fandom takes things like Dirty Pair, which is so iconic. Right. It's so iconic that it almost doesn't even bear watching. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to actually see it because you're afraid
the reality will break the illusion.
Break the illusion. Or Cutie Honey is a lot like that too. Like, Like, really? That's what Cutie Honey is really like that? But it's really so iconic and important, you know?
Well,
And
I mean, that gets into a whole thing, but I had done a paper a long time ago, maybe like 15, 17 years ago, basically talking about that relationship between the work and the fandom. And how it's more than just headcanon filling in the gaps and stuff like that. It becomes that whole meta narrative and meta textual interaction,
right.
But it also is where people start getting confused, where it's like, somebody who's been a long time fan, they'll be like, yeah, such and such happened. And then you go back and it's like, no, it never actually happened.
No, it didn't. You wrote that in a story or read it somewhere else, and you thought, yes, that's of course what happened.
Makes sense. And then whoop, that's it. And it became, or these things that just become, it is known. And it's just everybody is like, yeah, sure, that's totally. I remember on like the Escaflowne mailing list like a million years ago. It was like, okay,
you had to do a lot of meta work on Escaflowne to make that make sense. I'm sorry, guys. I know if you love it, Escaflowne, I apologize, but legitimately, you had to do so much work.
I indoctrinated multiple people into like almost double digits worth of people into anime via Escaflowne. I have it, I think, in 4 different sets at this point. But yes, there were. It was an entire mailing list full of conversations of how did this and what the hell is that and this and that. But you make it work, and I think there is. This gets into a sort of different issue of like sort of the evolving nature of fandom. I on the sci-fi TV side, I tend to blame Lost, where people will deconstruct and pick at all of the literal. There's always plot holes, right?
Absolutely.
Writers are human,
but they literally pick at it.
They'll pick apart and until the point they'll say, "Oh, look, there's a hole," and then unraveled the entire. The X-Files is a hole that.
But that was like even previous because we were doing it on mailing lists, But yes, it was like the land of conspiracy theorists, right?
We had in my dorm, we had weekly X-Files night, and we literally it was everybody, and we had like the cappuccino machine and the RAs, and we would just sit there with the big TV. But I think that there, I often say don't nitpick the fun out of the thing, right? Like exactly. There is fun in sort of looking at the thing and saying, but how this?
If you're more feeling like you want to involve yourself in creation,
right?
For me, it's always about creating. So I always say there's 2 kinds of fans. There's lowercase f fans and uppercase fans. Uppercase f fans want to be part of the story, so they create things like they write fanfic or they write theories or they hoard information, and it's all good as long as you don't use that, don't weaponize any of that.
Right.
If you're doing AMVs, that's awesome. I'm super happy if you're doing cosplay. That's amazing and fantastic, and I can never do it, and I respect you so much. But the moment you say to me, you're not as much of a fan as I am, then I have to go, well, no, But people who nitpick the details, a lot of them don't have a creative, or at least my impression over the years is that they don't have a creative drive. So that they have to, cut and shape and sometimes they're good at it and sometimes they're just like, man, and you get those people.
I don't know. I think part of it is obviously going to be personality, but I think also this gets back to that idea, we were talking about of people using media to mirror their expected behavior, right? Sure. So if you are coming in from the outside, alien from outer space, and you see an entire long, mailing list or forum or Discord conversation exploring, well, how is it that nobody on the street sees Serena et al, like transform, like that doesn't make any sense,
right?
Why are they not picked up on surveillance cameras? Like they walk down the block and they're, look
because
at
it was 1992 and there were none. Jesus Christ! It's like
that gets into
the whole series literally goes through from VHS tapes to DVDs to CDs to DVDs in 5 years. Give the technology a chance, kids.
But this is one of those things, right? So, but my point is, like, if you are the alien and you're looking at this, you would say, oh, these people like don't like this thing, or they're taking it apart,
Right.
or whatever.
But part
And
of
it's
that
like,
is the fun of it.
it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like doing a collage or
Or
scrapbook
puzzle,
of
right?
the, exactly, or
And
puzzle
particularly
of
with
the
series
thing.
like
Yeah.
X-Files or Lost, you would that those two are laid out in a way to design to have giant holes so that you can
Right. But
sail them in
really,
not so
with
much, but
anything, especially anime with its like short series, and you have the
right.
people where it's like there's the people who will watch the anime and the people who read the manga and the people who may read the
Like
novels or
novels or
whatever.
whatever, right?
You're gonna get those. I'm not even gonna call those communication breakdowns, but they are
Different levels.
opportunities. They're
Yes,
opportunities, right?
opportunities. That's excellent.
So it's like a place where you want to kind of leave us like climbing, right? You want to leave the little chinks and gaps that you
Right.
could kind of get into, because if
Right.
it's a completely smooth wall where everything is
And
perfect
everybody's
and
going to have different
everything
chinks and gaps that appeal.
work for them, right?
Right, exactly. So that route and your route is not necessarily somebody else's route, which is why I always say, for me, I generally like to watch the anime first and then read the manga and then the light novel. So each layer gives me more information. And generally speaking, not entirely all the time, that's worked out really well for me. But we've got all these people coming into, I don't know, I'm in love with the villainess right now, and they're all like, and I'm like, the manga will actually answer like 98% of these questions. Just read the manga first, and then enjoy the light novels. But also, you should read the light novels because they're amazing and they go crazy places. So,
well, that's one of the issues with this genre, is that so much of it, especially now, I mean, that was one change that I didn't point out, but
yeah.
a lot of the early stuff was usually based on either novels or manga,
right?
To closer or further away adaptation
Mhm.
level, but a lot of the stuff now tends to be original series, which is, I guess, a little bit unusual in the current just in general. It seems like a lot
I mean,
of stuff
light
is not.
novels are a huge force behind anime because it's already proven popularity, right? So that's they're going, yay, okay, we don't have to stress about that. People will definitely like it. But even back in the day, I'm back to 12 Kingdoms for a second. And that was a huge series of novels, which we didn't get forever and ever and ever.
No.
Or Maria Sama ga Miteru, which we didn't get forever.
We still haven't gotten, as far as I know.
We still haven't gotten it. We're never going to get it. We are literally never going to get it. Learn Japanese, kids. But that sort of thing too. But then you get something like, again, War or Dirty Pair or whatever, and those are original works, and that's the animation, and that's
Dirty Pair was novels.
Was novels, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And then you had like Ghost in the Shell, which was a manga that has almost no relationship to the actual movies.
Totally separate things. Yes,
they're totally separate things, and you can't. I mean, you can read all the manga and watch all the anime and learn totally different things about the characters. And then sit down and watch all the movies again and go, I have no idea what's really going on. It doesn't relate to anything.
What is real? That's the whole point. What is real?
Isn't that great? I love it. I love that because it's literally because it's Oshi taking Shiro's stuff, and Oshi likes to hear himself talk. So, so I mean, but it's good stuff because you do get like, it's the action that you crave, right? You want the major to be really cool. And there's all this other in-depth stuff. And if you are watching something for the 30th time, if you're watching like Ghost in the Shell Innocence for the 30th time, which I did, because I was doing a lecture about it at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and I started noticing like so many little things. But when I saw it the first time, I'm watching it in a movie theater, and I could see that there's repeated footage and there's a lot of really detailed stuff, a lot of detailed symbolism and stuff. And and instead of paying attention to any of that, I'm obsessing about the shape of the sexoroids in the movie. And because they were weird, right? Do you remember this movie? They were weird, right? And I'm like, I know that artist. And as the credits go by, I stand up and I scream, Belmer! Because the whole movie, I was ignoring literally everything because the sexoroids are based on on sculpture designs by Hans Belmer. And I'm sure Oshi would have been so excited.
Oh, you got it.
Thing.
But this is the thing. This is my point. That this goes to that whole thing of, the medium is the message, and how you
especially with that,
especially with that, how you interact with it is going to change your thing. Whether you're in a theater, whether you're or in a club setting or something, or whether you're alone, watching it on a screen. you're going to get different things out of it. Reading the manga, you're going to get different things out of it than watching the anime. Right. And I think, you know, I usually poo-poo the folks who are like, oh, you can only really, you know, it's like, oh, you haven't read Hamlet until you've read it in the original Klingon, right? Yeah. It's like you can only truly, you know, absorb the work if you know, just you like sleep with the pages slapped onto your head. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But I do, I where I will draw exceptions to that, I think are some of these more, and not just that they're action oriented. You know, Dragon Ball is action oriented, right? Sure. I mean, I read the manga. I like the Dragon Ball manga, but you get the story and it's fine. But there's some things, if the action is part of the story, right? Like this is where you get in that thing where people are like, well, the cinematography is part of what is telling the story, right? Would I want to read a John Woo movie? You know what I mean? Like
totally.
Like it doesn't. You're not gonna. You're just not getting the same experience.
It's a visual thing. It's meant to be watched, like watching Shakespeare. It's meant to be performed. You are not meant to be reading it.
Right.
And once I realized that, I was like, oh, I get it. They're actually really stage plays. Like, really, you should be watching this on stage, and no other way of doing this makes any sense.
But that's, I think one of the, you know, good, bad points, you know, especially as we're in this era where it's like, if it's not current minus 1 year, good luck getting a hold of it.
Yeah, right.
You know, I was watching what was it, Colleen's anime reviews or whatever, and she had done a thing talking about you know, she does her, if you like X, you'll like Y, right? And so it was like, if you like JoJo, you'll like X, right? And you know, that fired off all of the Clamp fans, and they were like,
yeah.
But you know, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, yeah, but if you really want to go through the whole Clamp, I had a moment in time where I was able to do the entire Clamp campus, you know, thing, and I don't think you can do that in English right now anymore.
If I give you 20 masks, you would be like, and I don't even know what
you don't know who they are, why they are, who this kid is,
who
why you care about his mom's, any of that.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And then that's, to some extent, that's licensing is a giant nightmare of massive proportions, and partially also fandom only has a working knowledge of about 2 years as a whole, and individuals, and we talked about this briefly, individuals will come into a thing and they only know the thing they saw. So Licorice Recoil came in last year and people were like, this is the greatest and only thing that has ever been like this thing, and there's nothing like it. And you're like,
well, I mean, except for this entire stack of
entire genre of things that are very, very similar, but it was good. I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely really enjoyed it. And if they had decided to go with a second season, I absolutely would have watched it. I could feel that this was meant to be the end of it.
Yes,
which is why I read the light novel.
Yeah.
Which does take it a little bit further. But the bottom line is that this was not an experiment. You know what I'm saying? This was using tried and true tropes. That it's a formula. You take a girl who is drawn to look younger than she actually is, because it's very appealing to a portion of the audience who's been educated to find that appealing.
Right.
And it's simpler and easier for the animators and for the manga artists or whatever, because it takes a lot less time than real art. And yes, I just said that. And because it does. And then we take this tried and true formula. It's two women in a stressful situation. Their lives are in danger. One of them has a secret. One of them has a different secret. We bond. We fix each other's secrets, sort of ish, and we grow stronger. And then we make an ultimate sacrifice that turns out to not have to need to be made, and also isn't really at the end, because love saves the day, even if it's just the love of two good friends who with guns.
Our friends.
They are friends. You know, and I can see you look at it, you know, I can see when people look at it and go, you know, this is totally Yuri. And of course it's designed to also read that way too. You know, and there's nothing wrong with reading it that way. It's just not objectively speaking.
Well, that gets into a whole, I mean, that gets into, I was in a back and forth. I mean, it wasn't even really a back and forth. It was just like a commentary. I guess somebody this was on one of the Gundam YouTube feeds. And I guess somebody at Sunrise had done an interview in Japan. and said something along the lines of, you know, similar to the B Train thing. They were like, you know, people were like, are the two main characters, are they married at the end?
And they
people,
said
they
yes,
like,
and then Bondi came in and said no.
it's up to whatever you want.
It's up for interpretation, and everyone
Yeah.
went, here's my interpretation, Bondi.
But it was just, it's always going to be a certain amount of, you know, I'm a big fan of creative ambiguity. I think, you know,
Sure.
it is a tool, and
Absolutely, and it makes sense for a pop culture media.
Yeah,
because if you can sell one more $300 box set, rock on, because that's what it's always about.
Well, this is the thing. That's my point. That there's always going to be this tension between the art and the commercial,
right? The story we wanted to tell and the thing we need to say
to sell model kits, and you know, I don't actually, for myself, I don't necessarily see that those two things have to be in opposition.
Right, I agree, and I think we're seeing a change in that.
It is changing. Yeah,
I think I'm in love with the villainous is working to specifically like, look, these two things do not have to be in opposition. We can have an openly queer isekai, in which that is actually the stated
the actual setup. Yes, yes.
And then it's also an amazing isekai, and also will sell a lot of box sets.
You're right.
Right, and you don't have to. Yeah. Or I reviewed today. She loves to cook. She loves to eat. Volume 3 came out.
I haven't read it yet, but yeah.
Oh, I highly recommend it. It's a very adult. It's very LGBTQ plus. It's queer. It knows it is. It's the premise, and it's very pro queer people and queer life. And they did a big event that supported marriage for all equality, marriage equality for all Japan, which is a group. Equality in Japan. And so they're making these things much more overt. And once you make it overt, then you can't have the company going, well,
but that's what had to happen here too. I mean, I think, I mean, that gets into a whole other thing, but where it's like, as TV and movies got more global, they actually got less risky, right? I mean, movies have always been expensive,
still,
you know, just the thing. But it's like, still, definitely, still ongoing. But like, there was a period where they were like, well, no, or I can't even say a period. There have been multiple periods where they're like, no, we can just tell the story that we want to tell no matter what. And then it's like, well, you know, that classic, well, will it play in Peoria? And it turns out, yes, it will play in Peoria.
But not in China. So we have to make sure that we take out the 2-second kiss in the background, because the censors there won't like it. And it's like, let them take it out.
It's like, not just that.
Because the
argument not going to show the movie.
The argument is let them make that decision for themselves, right? If they're going to make that decision, I'm not going to, maybe I won't stop you. Maybe I will say, well, then you can't have that movie. But if the art is important to you, then let the art stand and don't pre-censor for fascism's sake, you know?
Well, I feel like we're coming back around to a new Hays Code, essentially, where
oh gosh, yes,
they're like, like you say, they're sort of preemptively censoring, you know, which I mean, I you know, back to your original question, like where is the genre going? I that is actually a worry of mine. Like even just going through pulling the art for this, you used to have, I'm not going to say it's not at all, but you know, that classic, you know, pointing the guns at the camera, you know, looking down the barrel kind of thing.
Right.
They don't do that anymore.
No, they don't.
Used to have very obvious, you know, I mean, key art is marketing. I mean, commercial and art. I mean, it's okay. We all understand the context. You're here to sell things, but it's like I say to people, the art it's a promise, right? It's a promise of what you're going to find should you put your time, money, whatever.
Yeah, but they don't do that in Japan really all that much.
They don't do it. Yeah,
it's really a digression in a lot of cases. I mean, like I used to joke about New Type, you know, where they would take two characters who objectively were never near each other in the series and drape them over each other, and you'd be like, nothing here. Yeah. This is not a real thing. Like, this doesn't exist in the story,
but this in the metaverse that is New Type magazine.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Or the covers. This is the argument I have about covers. Like, do not, like, in some books,
covers lie.
Covers lie in Japanese manga all the time. That book isn't even about the 15 girls on the cover. It's about some schlub dude who comes here and all the girls are loving him, like he's not even on the cover, right? But it's really about him. Like, so first thing I do is I look it up and I go, so and so, a young high school student, some guy, and I go, oh, okay, that's fine, like, because he's not even on the cover, because we wouldn't want to show him, because all the presumed audience is supposed to map themselves into that role, and that's also a thing. It's and I get it. Yeah.
That's its own issue. But my point is that covers always lie. I mean, that's also
the marketing art is a 50-50 chance of lying.
I can't remember if it was I think it might have been Lester Del Rey, but it was somebody who basically said you always have to put a dragon on the cover.
Yes,
that's how people will know it's fantasy and they'll buy it.
That's right.
Even if there are no dragons anywhere in the story.
Right. No, I actually have a friend whose book has a dragon on the cover. Even now, there's 0 dragons in the book. She had no choice. She could pick the green dragon, the brown dragon, the blue dragon, but she had to put a dragon. There's like literally no dragons.
There's no dragons. But this is what I'm saying. You are selling it, but it is that sense of this is a promise to the audience. And I think that there's always a pendulum to it, but I think we're swinging really far off. Whereas you say, like, the cover just has no bearing whatsoever. And so you're trying to sell like a girls with guns anime. Like Horus Recall is a girls with, it is. It's
absolutely
literally about girls with guns.
With guns, shooting things. That's literally the story.
It's literally the story. I didn't realize, I had seen the art multiple times.
Had no idea.
I didn't know what it was about, right? And then when people were talking about it, I was like, oh, okay. But like, if you're looking at the cover art, I'm like,
2 girls in a cafe.
Look, there are guns. Oh, wow, okay.
But it looks like 2 girls at a cafe, and you have no idea
what
the story's about. Like, right.
No. So it's like, as compared to things like the, like the sort of Monster Girls, or if it's a, a story about vampires, you wouldn't expect to see a cover for a story about vampires where it's like, oh, this is just a sunny day in a meadow. Like,
all right, I have to tell you, I just reviewed The Vexations of a Shut-In Vampire. Mm-hmm. The title cover for that is literally a bunch of girls. And there's no context. There's just a bunch of girls. So on my alt text, I wrote generic title image with a lot of girls with varying colored hair and clothing. There's no relationship to the story at all. You have no idea how violent it is. You have no idea what it's about. You have if the title of the series didn't say vampire, you would have no idea who the vampire is.
So then this gets into this whole thing of, it's like, is this, I mean, I have to assume it's a commercial, it's somebody decision. Is making the decision, right? And it's like, this is one of those, are people falling for it, or are people angry? Because if you see the cover, with 10 girls of different color hair, and you think, okay, this is some kind of a wacky harem story, or cute girls doing cute things story, and then it's like, it's Hellsing. Like, that's not, now I
want to do a series.
You're not
of all
making
covers.
Anyone happy with that.
Now I want to do a series of all covers for Hellsing and Black Lagoon.
Well, I think for a while there's somebody had done like, I think I have in my like stack of old pictures, it's like all of the Hellsing people as chibis, and it's like somewhere in an alternate universe where for a while there where they were doing like the side anime for things where it was all chibis. It's like somewhere there's a Hellsing chibi. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's Dojin for
SDOVA or Dojinshi or something. Yeah, yeah. No, I remember that. That was always a thing. Yeah. No, now I really want that. I did want to have one other point, which I thought was really interesting that you made about the mother, as partner, or partner as mother. Like, I was thinking immediately, I thought of Claymore, which did that. Now, again, not guns, it's swords, but weapons. Right. But then you had the whole story with Therese, and the whole idea that this foster mother was her mentor.
Right.
But even though there was, again, intimacy, the ultimate goal there was going to have to be death. Like, one of them was going to die, and possibly both of them, and there was no way out of that.
Right.
How do we get there? And that was that was immediately what I thought of when you said that. So I thought that was a very interesting way of talking about it. And the other thing that came into my mind was how influential fake was when it came out, although it was BL, because it was a moment where you had that they're partners, they're cops, they're tough. One is A and the other is B, blah, 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 opposites attract. And then they actually kissed and people lost their minds. Like, you remember, they like completely went nuts because it went there.
Right.
It actually went there. And that was such a huge moment for the opposite, you know, for not the opposite, for the BL fandom, you know.
Right.
So,
but this is the thing, it's like so many, you know, that's what I was talking about, like the military tropes. So many of these tropes are built on these ideas of either or both, these bonds being formed between people who are not, you know, from disparate worlds or disparate, you know, contexts. You know, that whole, we're going to build a unit that is now strong, you know, the core is your family, right? Like this is now stronger than anything
if somebody
else
kills one of those people, they killed a brother, right?
Right.
But it's just like Sparta, you know, it's Patroclus and Achilles, really. That's never been different, right?
No,
So
it's never been different, but it's the difference
but with girls.
is, well, A, with girls, but also that you are explicitly saying there is a, you know, there is a homoerotic component to this framework.
Like Achilles and Patroclus, yes, exactly. You know, because when you get to that level of tension, and also the circumstances under which you would find yourselves under the greatest stress, we know as adults that those are the kinds of things that will often end up with, if it were a heterosexual couple, you would expect them to sleep together the night before the battle. Like that's just an obvious statement.
Right.
So that night, the two of, you know, of these two characters are huddling there together before the final battle, you would expect them to find physical release in each other, because if it were a straight couple or two guys, you would not question it at all.
Right.
So in your head, it becomes like, oh yes, obviously.
It becomes, that's the whole thing. It's like, well, oh yes, obviously. And then then the whole point is sort of casting a light on those assumptions.
Right.
Like, you know,
in theory, and hopefully it makes you think about one of those assumptions you have.
Right. Well, either way, it's like, why do you assume it wouldn't happen in this context when it happens in all these other contexts?
Or why do you assume it would definitely happen when we haven't seen necessarily sexual attention before them? Like all those 80s shows you were talking about, like, you know, where they'd say, oh, can you stand the sexual tension? And I'd be like, look, they hate each other's guts. I have no idea why you think they like each other. Like, I watched Remington Steele with a completely different lens than every single other human on the planet. The woman could not stand him. Lucky Star is another good example of that. You know, it was like, oh yeah, Kanata, whatever the other character is, like, oh, they like each other. I'm like, no, she hates her so much. And when you cannot tolerate that, why would you imagine that that's actually a sign of affection? Because like,
well, weird. That gets into the whole thing of people are, it's like you're trained to read the code, and you're not applying actual lived experience or logic to it, right?
Or you don't have it to apply,
or you don't have it to
talking about an audience who's young and possibly likely to be immature, or sexually immature, or I mean, that's what we always saw early days on the Yuricon mailing list, is people would say, oh, there's two girls on the screen, they're obviously a couple, and we'd be like, let me explain how this works. There are more than one kind of relationship between women,
right?
And a lot of people genuinely did not know that. You know, they just didn't realize that we can be friends, intimate friends who touch or hold hands or hug, and there actually be no romantic or sexual desire there, because it didn't never occur to them, or they'd never seen it, or had no modeling for it.
We were having a conversation, I think it might have been one, like it was a family conversation, but I can't remember, it might have been one of the holidays or something, and we were talking about that thing where it's like, you know, women will just walk up to a stranger, you know, I'll be at the doctor's office and I'll be like, oh, that's really nice boots, or that blouse looks really nice on you. I don't know that person. I'm hitting on that person. I'm just, you know, expressing, you know, well, that is really nice. You have a wonderful day, blah, 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 right?
But the difference is that you can say that, and the difference between that is a great dress and you look hot is humongous. the little space between those two things are massive, and apparently a lot of people cannot
No space.
see that space. I walk up to I literally walk up to random strangers all the time and go, "That is an amazing dress. Those are great shoes. Your hair looks great." Because women don't get a lot of compliments on non-sexual things, or people, or don't get compliments from people who aren't also saying "I would do you," you know?
Right.
And so I'm like, "Oh, you look together. You look amazing today." And to say that is a sign of that you notice them, and that they got the way they feel and the way they look are matching, and that's very, very affirmative. Right. But saying, "Wow, you look hot," is actually saying, "Wow, I am sexually attracted to you or sexually aroused by you," which is absolutely the least interesting fact on the planet.
Well,
There's
it takes the lens from, I am complimenting you, and what I'm trying to do is change your emotional state, and it's changing it to, this is me just talking about my emotional
state.
And
that's also,
totally
you should know that I'm too messed now because I found you attractive, which is just, no one wants to hear about your penis. Like, that's just not. So
that could be an entire manga all by itself, just titled "No One Wants to Hear."
I used to write about this a lot on Quora, where people would say, "Well, I don't understand how I can compliment a woman." And I'm like, "Well, are you mentioning attractiveness or sex or their body parts? Then just don't do that. Just say nice shoes.
Just say nice shoes.
Nice shoes, man." Like,
or did you change your haircut or something?
Or that was a great presentation.
That's fine.
That would be, or "Stop talking, John. She just said the same thing. Let's respond to her." Like, that would be the greatest compliment in the world, right? Like, that's right. And honestly, just to wrap it up, back to what we were talking about, a lot of the problems that the characters in Girls with Guns stories face is exactly that sort of lack of respect.
Yes.
And going back to Licorice Recoil, you are the two absolute best people we have, and we're going to do nothing but undermine you.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry, what?
But you see, like that was my point, that goes all the way back to the beginning of the genre. It's Absolutely. A thing. I can't even say that it's a theme. It is the theme. Baked into it. You know, Charlie's Angels, I had forgotten that the whole point they got together was because they had been cops, they were basically being treated as coffee girls.
Yep.
And they're like, "No, I'm a damn good detective." And
that's right.
The opportunity.
That's right. Well, even like Avengers, you know, that was one of the things that made the Avengers so amazing back in the day, is that, you know, here's, you know, this female character who is strong and competent, and the guy and she are teasing at each other, but as equals.
Right.
There's never any sense
acknowledgement that they are equals. Right.
There's never any sense that one of them is being told, "No, go get a sandwich," you know.
There was to your point, you were like, you know, you can know about Dirty Pair, but you don't have to see it. I think it was like the second I went back to watch like the first few episodes, and it's like the second or third episode, and they get an assignment and they're going on like some kind of space cruise ship, right?
Of course.
That part doesn't even matter. But it's an infiltration mission, and they're assigned to this like veteran guy, and he, you know, through the course of the thing, it basically comes out that he just brought them so that they could go into like the women's room, and, you know, they're supposed to be hunting for you know, bad guys. And he was like, "Well, I brought you along so that you could go to places I can't go." Right. You know, it was just a step above, "We just want you to stand there and look pretty."
Right.
And so the entire episode, you know, I mean, it's a they fight crime show, so they get the bad guys, but the whole point of it was that by the end of it, they had proven their respective capabilities, of, you know, Kay being the engineer and Yuri being the infiltration specialist and you know, hand-to-hand combat specialist, and that they, you know, they saved the day and everything. And, you know, I'm like, this was made like 40 years ago. They could have made it literally today.
Right.
I remember talking to you know, I'm in like some game dev discords, and there was a woman who was like, "Oh, these are tips for what you could do when you feel yourself starting to cry in a meeting. It's like you could drink some water, or you could go excuse yourself to the bathroom, or this or that." And I'm like, how the fuck many times does this happen to you that you come up with
every single person has to go, like, it's like we have to tell every single person all over again, You also mentioned Gunsmith Cast, which I appreciate because that was a great series. But there's another one where, to your point about being the people you need to be, the way you need to be them. I'm like, there's Raleigh, who is obviously a gun specialist and cars, and there's May, who is your munitions specialist, and every single character, Becky, who is an information specialist, and every single person has absolutely nobody on top of them telling them they can't, they shouldn't, or even like with Kay and Yuri, where, you know, oh my God, you blew it up again. Like, we fucking blow up every single thing we ever touch. How do you not know that? Why do you send us the things that shouldn't be blown up, dumbass? That's not our fault.
That's the thing. I had gone into Dirty Pair with, like, that was the thing. Oh, they blow things up every time. Yeah. Except they are like, it's more like a MacGyver competency level thing, right, where it's not, oh, they blow it up. It's they get the mission done.
Right.
The mission was save the people.
Right.
They save the people. If there's collateral damage, that's what insurance is
for.
The mission was save the people.
Right. Save the people.
There's this whole thing. And I'm like, well, that's really your classic. That is usually how these sort of maverick cop, you know, that's
right.
like Lethal
that's exactly
Weapon, right?
Story,
like that's
right.
exactly how that works.
Right.
But why is it when they cast it as women, it's like, oh, they always screw up, and why are they here?
They haven't screwed up. They
must be diversity hires, right? Like, I mean, that would be the language if you made that show today, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, so it's this sense of, no, they are competent.
Yep.
But there will be, you know.
But also, there are two people who are sent into a situation where, realistically, if we're going to pretend for a moment to be realistic, there should be like 30 people involved.
It should be like a couple of special forces.
Do you know what I'm saying? So that we end up blowing up the whatever is because we were not sourced appropriately. So, like, I mean, I would do that like all over again. I have this fantasy of myself like rewriting all of Sailor Moon from beginning to end, like sensibly, and I feel like I should do that with Dirty Pair too. Like, I know Adam Warren already did it, but I still feel like we could do it better. Like, just to, like, you know, just go, hey boss, screw you didn't send the 30 other people we need on this mission. So I mean, yes, the ship got blown up.
You could do like, I mean, it could just be an abridged thing where instead of taking stuff out, you're essentially just inserting
bubbles,
inserting a little bubble where it's like, oh, you know, angels, this is your mission. And then they're like, okay, here's our spec sheet for what we're going to need.
That would actually be an amazing custom job of like the manga. Just take the manga and just keep, you know.
Just add the little bubbles.
Add bubbles for the things that I was saying, like, what? We don't have any of this stuff. Well, the ship's going to get blown up, boss.
It's like, we're going to need all of these, you know, we're going to need a couple of mission specialists. We're going to need this and that and that. And they're like, we don't have the budget. And so, okay, you just get you. That's it. You get you and some lipstick.
If you're going to cheap out, you're going to get this. That's the way it is, right? I mean, there's a really good manga that just came out last year called SHWD Should. It's out from Seven Seas. It's a doujinshi series that I'd actually picked up as a doujinshi series at Komitia in 2019. And now it's out as a manga, and it's about, like, it's very Silent Mobius-ish. So I think you would really like it. It's like these creatures that don't look like anything, but they attack people's minds and make them go crazy. Very, very like Lucifer Hawk. And the difference is that in this case, we have a division of women of men and women who are specialists. And the main characters are these huge, beefy, muscled women. Like, they're massive, and they're not like necessarily large, fat, but they're just huge with these monster biceps. And the biggest one of them is the main character, and she is so sweet and so feminine and so adorable and absolutely darling. Like, you want to hug, like, you immediately want to open up the manga into reality and give her hugs because she's so cute. And it's actually really a lot of fun because they do have the conversations about sourcing and about, you know, how we're respected, but also they understand the limitations of their job. So they have discussions about, if we do this, this is a likely outcome. We could do that, but then you're putting yourself at risk. And as my partner, I don't want you to put yourself at risk. I mean, they have those conversations, and I think that's amazing.
Well, I think one of those interesting places we're going to go is, you know, we started getting more and better of these kinds of stories as we had in real life more women who were in law enforcement, who were detectives or FBI or spies or military. I do wonder if, I mean, you know, they come back and they tell their stories, as we get more, I mean, we, you know, my mom says, you know, it's like every war has had women involved in the
Absolutely.
combat. All you're doing now is they're getting paid for it. Like that's
right.
the only thing that's
Right.
changed.
Whenever when you get that whole women were never combatants, you're like, no, women have always been combatants. It's just that we didn't have the guns.
Because of course the war just parted like the Red Sea
Right,
around
them,
the
right.
women. Yes. But no, but as you get more, you know, veterans who are creators, essentially, you know, will that start to, you know, will they bring different insights essentially to these kinds of things? Because in a lot of cases, you know, these are creators who are you know, they do their research and everything. They are they're essentially fans who you know, ascended fans essentially, who, you know,
right,
they really
exactly.
like this stuff.
We're all Uber fans, right?
Right, but they're not necessarily people who have, I mean, they're writers, they're not cops, right? Like so they're not necessarily coming to it with that perspective. But I think that will actually be interesting.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that too. You were right about a lot of the girls with guns stuff coming out of seinen, and so, you know, a lot of it's got a fantasy aspect to it, and obviously, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's where certainly I came into it from then, and I've always liked those. But we're also starting to see more not traditional creators on that side, and more women doing it, more queer women doing it, and you get different ideas like SHWD. You get this different idea of what women's bodies should be looking, what their competency level should be, what their strength and physical endurance are, and that's all to the very good, you know, and diversity in those stories. So I think you're going to see again push and pull on a lot of that.
Right,
you know?
right.
I do have a lot of hope that diversity in, I mean, manga and anime are so weird, but anime particularly is so conservative.
Yeah.
And it's so striking because if you look at fandom here in America, you might be inclined to think that like we're a really progressive fandom.
But
if you
even with
people
that,
online screaming, like if you just say, well, those people aren't real, but if you go to like an event and you see real people in the real world, you think, wow, we're so progressive and everyone's, you know, queer friendly and, you know, sexuality and gender friendly. And then you find that Bandai won't allow Miura and Suleta's wedding, that their wedding bands, which we all saw in
which were a plot point.
It was a plot point. It was literally commented on by a character in the story at the end there. That's left open to interpretation. And worse for me was that Katakawa bent and took it off of the website, and I was angry at Katakawa, more angry at Katakawa than Bandai, because Bandai I imagine to be a bunch of hairless old men. I was in my head, Bandai is a bunch of like old balding comb over dudes, you know, like they always have. They've always the same guys. But Katakawa, I always feel like they should have been better about it because they make a lot of money off of queerness. So
they do.
I thought,
but I think that's the tension of our age that you know, people will say, oh, you know, why are people doing all of this stuff? And it's like, it's political or whatever. It's like, no, man, it is at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end about money. Just
also about fear. It's about fear. But there's definitely a tension for that particular kind of person, that should we offend one person that is like us, the world will collapse. So if we offend a politician or another old man, let's say, you know, if we, because they don't count anybody else, you know, they only count people like themselves. What if the guy I play golf with is offended, you know?
Well, that's the onion model, right? Like that things are more impactful if they happen to somebody who is you or someone very like you versus somebody else. So it's like, I mean, I understand that there's some of that's just baked into humans, and it's like, okay, I think the only thing that's going to change with that is, like I said, money. Like as the number of consumers, you know, I can't even say number of people because everybody is not a consumer, but as the number of consumers and their dollars outweigh the dollars
of the other side
of people who are.
That's what I've said for years. The market is not, the audience is not the market. When you tell me, well, there's a huge audience, but if the market isn't buying, then it doesn't matter. You have to have the market, not the audience. So yes, when you can sell 360,000 copies of this Blu-ray set, not this one, But I do think, again, I'm in love with the villainess is a huge bellwether in this case, because they King Records put the Blu-ray pre-order up before the anime even launched. They think it's going to be huge. So, you know, we'll see how that goes. I'd like to see that break a lot of records, because if we can do that, then we can say, look, this audience was here all along, and the market speaks to that. So
I just hope they take away the right lessons from it. I just before this, I was talking to somebody about you know, Barbie, you know, the Barbie movie, and I was like,
oh,
were
they
like,
all want toys from the 70s. No, we fucking don't want toys.
I was like, so will the takeaway be that there is a market for serious movies with either women in front of the camera or women behind the camera, or
Or
both,
both?
you know, addressing these sort of issues? I mean, you
No,
know,
but they're
everybody
just
is welcome,
slinky
but like
fucking
these are
movies.
the
Yeah.
stories. It's like, no, they want stories about Raggedy Ann and Andy, and it's like, no.
Yeah, like, and Slinky or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Like missing the point completely. But of course, it's, you know, missing the forest for the trees is to some extent what they've always done. So, and I think I want to say, first of all, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. It was awesome. It's one of my favorite topics. I could talk to you endlessly about that. Thank you so much for being part of the 20th anniversary of Yuricon. I mean, that in itself is like
That
just
is so
amazing.
crazy.
It's crazy. So thank you again. And where can people find you on the lines?
So I normally used to say on Twitter. my account is still there. I hold, you know, hope springs eternal that I'll wake up one day and it will have just, you know, risen like a phoenix from the ashes. So people can contact me that way. Otherwise, you know, my website is up, studiodisa.com.
Okay.
And that has all my, you know, all my socials and contacts.
Excellent.
And stuff like
Excellent.
that.
And I will shoot you off my next Blue Sky invite, because it's like we've all moved. All of manga and anime Twitter has moved over because we don't believe in Twitter. So
I don't know. That's a whole other thing where I'm just like, we've got to see where it shakes out. I still remember the MySpace days where somebody had told me, it's like, you got to get on this MySpace thing. Everybody is there.
we've all migrated a bunch of times.
Move everything over there.
Live journal.
I was like, well, let me just wait and see if you know, if the actual members end up on there. And then I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 months later that News Corp had bought MySpace, and then it all went up.
And it does that, but that's why. I mean, people say, you know, blogs are over, websites are over. I'm like, you know what? Owning my own space is a huge power trip, because I don't have to worry. There's always somewhere that is owned by me, you know, and I will use Patreon, and I'll use, you know, Ko-fi, I'll use, you know, whatever Blue Space, my Mastodon and Blue Sky and Twitter, whatever. But I always will have my own home, and that's like your site. It's important.
Well, that's actually the marketing advice that you know, the pros give. They're like, yeah, you could build up your Twitter following, your Instagram following, or whatever, but you always should have a mailing list at the, you know, or your Discord or whatever, but have something that even if all of that other stuff went away, you could still hold on.
I mean, if you had been paying attention just historically at Yuricon for 20 years, you would see that there's the links change all the time. And now I have different socials all the time.
Yeah.
MeWe comes in because we all thought we would leave Facebook. No one's leaving Facebook. MeWe's gone. You know, it's just, and you know, is Mastodon a good source? It's okay. But Blue Sky seems to be where at the moment anime, manga, Twitter is moving pretty much en masse. So the next invite I get, I'll shoot you so we can catch you there as well. So thank you again, Mandisa. That was just exceptional, and I hope you have a very wonderful rest of the evening.
Have a wonderful rest of the year. I will see you on the social platform that shall not be named.
I'll see you, and I want to thank everybody who's watched so far, and we'll see you again on Yuri Studio.